The morning started like any other family vacation. The Henderson family had been planning this trip to Redwood National Park for months. Tom Henderson loaded the last of their camping gear into the trunk, while his wife Rachel checked their supplies one more time. Their daughter Lily, just 8 years old, bounced excitedly in the backseat, clutching her favorite stuffed rabbit. The drive took them through winding mountain roads, past towering trees that seemed to touch the sky. Lily pressed her face against the window, amazed by how small their car looked compared to the giant redwoods. She'd never seen anything like it. Rachel turned around and smiled at her daughter's wonder, her heart full of happiness. This was exactly what they needed, a break from the city, from work stress, from everything. They arrived at the campsite around noon. The sun filtered through the canopy above, creating patches of golden light on the forest floor. The air smelled fresh like pine and earth. Tom picked the perfect spot near a clearing, far enough from other campers to feel private but close enough to the main trail to feel safe. Other families were scattered throughout the area, their laughter and chatter creating a peaceful background noise. While Tom and Rachel began unpacking the car, Lily explored the immediate area around their campsite. She found interesting rocks, watched a squirrel dart up a tree, and collected pine cones. Rachel had made her wear a colorful beaded bracelet that morning, one Lily had made herself at summer camp the previous year. The beads spelled out her name, and attached to it was a small metal tag with their phone number. "Just in case, stay where we can see you." "Sweetie," Rachel called out as she struggled with a tent pole. "I will, Mom." Lily's voice rang out cheerfully. Tom wrestled with the tent instructions, muttering under his breath. He'd watched 3 YouTube videos on how to set up this particular model, but somehow it still didn't make sense. Rachel laughed and took over, her organizational skills coming to the rescue. They worked together, focused on getting the tent upright before the afternoon heat became unbearable. Maybe it was 5 minutes. Maybe it was 10. Time moves differently when you're focused on a task. But when Rachel finally looked up, wiping sweat from her forehead, she expected to see Lily examining rocks or chasing butterflies nearby. The clearing was empty. "Lily?" Rachel called out, not worried yet. "Kids wander. It's what they do," no answer. "Lily, honey, where are you?" Her voice was louder now, with an edge to it. Tom looked up from the tent stakes. He saw the expression on Rachel's face and felt his stomach tighten. They both started calling her name, walking in widening circles around their campsite. Other campers looked over, curious at first, then concerned as they saw the panic beginning to spread across the parents' faces. "She was just here," Tom said, his voice shaking. "She was right here." They searched the immediate area, then expanded outward. Other campers joined in, calling Lily's name. Someone contacted the park rangers. Within 30 minutes, the small search had grown into something much larger. Park rangers arrived with radios and maps, asking questions Tom and Rachel could barely answer through their rising panic. What was she wearing? A purple t-shirt with a rainbow on it, blue shorts, white sneakers with pink laces, that beaded bracelet with her name on it. Did she know not to wander off? Yes, they'd told her 100 times. Could she have gone toward the trail? Maybe they didn't know. They hadn't been watching. That last admission felt like swallowing glass. They hadn't been watching. They'd been focused on a stupid tent, and now their daughter was gone. The first night was the worst. Search and rescue teams combed through the forest with flashlights and dogs. Helicopters with thermal imaging flew overhead. Volunteers from nearby towns showed up to help. Everyone kept saying that children are usually found within the first few hours, that she probably just wandered off and got turned around, that she'd be scared but okay. But hour after hour passed with no sign of her. Rachel couldn't eat. She couldn't sit still. She walked with the search parties until her feet bled, calling Lily's name until her voice gave out. Tom coordinated with the rangers, studied maps, tried to think logically about where an 8-year-old might go. But logic didn't help. Nothing helped. Days turned into weeks. The massive search operation slowly scaled down. The news crews that had camped out in the parking lot packed up their equipment and moved on to other stories. Volunteers returned to their regular lives. The forest had been searched multiple times. Every trail, every creek, every possible area where a small child might have gone. Nothing. No clothing, no footprints, no sign that Lily Henderson had ever been there at all. The hardest part was the not knowing. If something terrible had happened, at least they would know. They could grieve. They could find some way to move forward. But this limbo, this horrible space between hope and despair, was unbearable. Every phone call made their hearts race. Every knock on the door might be news. Rachel took a leave of absence from her job as a teacher. She couldn't imagine standing in front of a classroom of children when her own daughter was missing. Tom tried to go back to work at the accounting firm, but he'd find himself staring at spreadsheets without seeing them, his mind always in those woods. They appeared on every news program that would have them, holding up Lily's school photo with her gap-toothed smile. They printed thousands of flyers and distributed them across 3 states. They set up a Facebook page that was shared over and over. Tips came in, dozens of them, but none led anywhere. Someone thought they saw her at a rest stop in Nevada. Another person was sure they'd seen her at a grocery store in Oregon. Every false hope broke them a little more. 3 months passed. Autumn arrived, painting the trees in colors that would have delighted Lily. Rachel kept her daughter's room exactly as she'd left it, stuffed animals on the bed, drawings taped to the walls, that pink backpack hanging on the door hook. Tom drove back to Redwood Park every single weekend, walking the trails alone, unable to accept that his little girl had simply vanished. The detective assigned to their case was kind but realistic. He explained that after this much time, the chances of finding Lily alive were extremely slim. He didn't say it directly, but the meaning was clear. They needed to prepare themselves for the worst, but Rachel refused to believe it. She felt it in her bones, a mother's instinct that wouldn't let go. Lily was alive somewhere. She had to be. Rachel just didn't know where or how to find her. What she didn't know was that halfway around the world, on a tiny island that barely appeared on maps, something was about to be discovered that would change everything. Kenji Yamamoto had been a fisherman for 32 years. He knew the waters around Japan better than he knew his own hometown. Every morning before dawn, he'd take his boat out just like his father had done, and his grandfather before that. The work was hard, the hours were long, but there was something peaceful about being out on the ocean with nothing but the sound of waves and seabirds. This particular morning, Kenji was working near a small island that most people had never heard of. It didn't even have a real name on the official maps. The locals called it Forgotten Island, which suited it perfectly. The place was nothing but rocks and sparse vegetation, with no fresh water and no reason for anyone to visit. Sometimes debris would wash up on its shores, carried by the currents from who knows where. Kenji wasn't planning to go ashore that day. He was checking his nets about 50 meters from the rocky beach when he noticed something unusual. The morning sun hit the water at just the right angle, and something sparkled between the rocks near the shore. It caught his eye in a way that made him curious. He'd found strange things in these waters before. Bottles with messages inside, pieces of boats. Once even a waterproof camera that still worked. The ocean was full of mysteries, carrying objects from one side of the world to another. But something about this particular glint made him want to investigate. Kenji anchored his boat and waded through the shallow water toward the rocks. The water was cold, even though summer was approaching. He had to climb over several large stones, careful not to slip on the algae. There, wedged between 2 rocks in a small pool, was what had caught his attention. It was a bracelet. A child's bracelet. Kenji picked it up carefully, water dripping from the colorful beads. It was the kind of thing a young girl might make at school or camp. Simple, but made with care. The beads spelled out a name, Lily. But what really made Kenji's heart skip was the small metal tag attached to it. He wiped away the salt and grime, squinting to read the engraving. There was a phone number. An international number starting with the code for the United States. Kenji stood there in the shallow water for a long moment, turning the bracelet over in his weathered hands. This wasn't just random debris. This belonged to someone, a child named Lily from America, whose bracelet had somehow traveled across the Pacific Ocean to end up here, on this forgotten piece of rock. He thought about leaving it. It wasn't really his business. But then he thought about his own granddaughter, about how worried he'd be if she lost something precious. And this wasn't just any object, it had a phone number on it. Someone had put that number there for a reason, probably hoping it would help if the child got lost. Back on his boat, Kenji photographed the bracelet from several angles. His hands weren't steady. At 60 years old, he wasn't great with technology. But he managed to get some clear pictures. His daughter had convinced him to join social media a few years back. though he rarely posted anything. Mostly he just looked at pictures of his grandchildren. But tonight he posted the photos of the bracelet with a simple message in Japanese. Found this near forgotten island. It has a name Lily and an American phone number. Does anyone know who this belongs to? He didn't expect much. Maybe someone would suggest calling the number directly, though Kenji's English wasn't good enough for that. Maybe nobody would see it at all. He set his phone down and went to prepare his dinner, rice and the fish he'd caught that morning. What Kenji didn't know was that social media has a way of spreading information faster than any ocean current. His daughter saw the post first and shared it with her friends. One of them shared it with a friend who had lived in California. That person shared it to a community group for Americans living in Japan. From there it jumped across the Pacific, shared and reshared, translated and retranslated. Within 6 hours, Kenji's post had been shared over 3,000 times. People were commenting in multiple languages, asking questions, offering theories. Someone suggested it might be from a cruise ship accident. Another person wondered if it belonged to a missing child. The post kept spreading, reaching further and further. By the next morning, when Kenji checked his phone, he had hundreds of notifications. He couldn't read most of them. They were in English, Spanish, Portuguese, languages he didn't understand. His daughter called him, excited and confused, saying his post was going viral, whatever that meant. Then came the message that changed everything. It was from an organization called Pacific Hope Foundation, a group that worked on missing children cases across multiple countries. They'd seen the post and wanted to know more. They asked if they could share his information with authorities in the United States. Kenji agreed, though he still wasn't sure what all the fuss was about. It was just a bracelet. Sad that a child had lost it, certainly, but why were so many people interested? The answer came 2 days later when a woman from the foundation video called him. She had a translator to help them communicate. The woman's name was Patricia, and she was crying as she spoke. "Mr. Yamamoto," she said through the translator, "the bracelet you found belongs to a little girl who disappeared 3 months ago in California. Her name is Lily Henderson. Her parents have been searching for her ever since." Kenji felt his blood run cold. A missing child. The bracelet had traveled thousands of miles across the ocean, from California to this remote island off the coast of Japan. But how? Why? Patricia explained that they needed to examine the bracelet, to verify it was really Lily's, and to understand how it could have possibly ended up where Kenji found it. The FBI was involved now. Coast Guard officials from both countries were being contacted. Satellite images of Forgotten Island were being pulled up and analyzed. "Mr. Yamamoto," Patricia said, her voice shaking with emotion, "you may have just given Lily's parents the first real hope they've had in 3 months. We don't know what this means yet, but it's something. It's more than we had yesterday." After the call ended, Kenji sat in his small house looking at the bracelet that now sat in a plastic bag on his kitchen table. He thought about the vast ocean he worked on every day, about the currents that could carry something so small across such an enormous distance. He thought about a little girl named Lily, and about her parents who must be desperate with worry. The ocean had given up one of its secrets. But the mystery was far from solved. If Lily's bracelet was here on Forgotten Island, then where was Lily herself? Had she been on a boat that passed nearby? Had someone thrown it overboard? Or, and this thought made Kenji's hands tremble, could she somehow have made it to that island? The next morning, news crews from Tokyo arrived at his dock. Kenji's quiet life as a fisherman was about to become very complicated. But he didn't mind. If finding this bracelet could help bring a lost child home, then dealing with cameras and questions was a small price to pay. Across the Pacific Ocean in a small house in California, Rachel Henderson was about to receive a phone call that would shatter the numbness she'd been living in for 3 months. Hope, that dangerous and beautiful thing, was about to come rushing back into her life. Rachel was folding laundry when her phone rang. It was a Wednesday afternoon, and she'd been trying to keep busy with mundane tasks to stop her mind from spiraling. 3 months of grief had taught her that idle hands made everything worse. She almost didn't answer the unknown number. She'd received so many spam calls lately, but something made her pick up. "Mrs. Henderson, this is Agent Caroline Martinez with the FBI. I'm calling about your daughter's case." Rachel's legs went weak. She sat down hard on the edge of the bed, laundry forgotten. Her heart was pounding so loudly she could barely hear her own voice. "Did you find her? Is she..." We don't know yet, Agent Martinez said quickly, her tone both cautious and urgent. But something has come up. Something significant. I need you to think carefully. The bracelet Lily was wearing when she disappeared, can you describe it to me? Rachel closed her eyes, picturing it perfectly. Colorful beads. She made it at camp last summer. The beads spelled out her name. It had a small metal tag with our phone number on it. There was a pause on the other end. Rachel could hear papers rustling, someone talking in the background. Mrs. Henderson, a fisherman in Japan, found a bracelet matching that description yesterday, on a small island in the Pacific Ocean. We need you to look at some photos to confirm if it's Lily's. The room started spinning. Japan. The Pacific Ocean. That was impossible. How could Lily's bracelet be in Japan when she disappeared in California? Rachel's mind raced through impossible scenarios, each more frightening than the last. Agent Martinez sent the photos to her phone. With shaking hands, Rachel opened them. There it was. Lily's bracelet. She'd know it anywhere. Those specific colored beads in that exact pattern, the slightly crooked letter Y because Lily had threaded it herself. And that metal tag, now tarnished by salt water but still clearly showing their phone number. It's hers. Rachel whispered, That's Lily's bracelet. But I don't understand. We don't understand either, Agent Martinez admitted. But we're working on it. I need you and your husband to stay by your phones. We're organizing a multi-agency response. The Japanese Coast Guard is involved now. We're going to figure this out. When Tom got home from work an hour later, he found Rachel sitting at the kitchen table staring at her phone, tears streaming down her face. She showed him the photos without speaking. Tom looked at the bracelet, then at his wife, then back at the bracelet. His analytical mind tried to make sense of it, tried to find a logical explanation, but came up empty. She could still be alive, Rachel said, her voice cracking. Tom, if her bracelet made it to Japan somehow, maybe she did too. Maybe she's still out there. Tom wanted to believe it. God, how he wanted to believe it. But he also didn't want to let hope destroy them all over again. They'd been through so much already. Let's wait to hear what the FBI says, he said carefully, taking Rachel's hand. Let's not jump to conclusions, but how could they not hope? For 3 months, they'd had nothing. Now they had something, even if it made no sense. The next 2 days were a blur of phone calls and video conferences. Experts were brought in. Oceanographers, maritime specialists, search and rescue coordinators. Everyone was trying to answer the same question. How could a bracelet travel from Northern California to a remote island off the coast of Japan? The oceanographers showed them current maps, explaining the complex patterns of water movement across the Pacific. In theory, debris could travel that distance, but it would take months, even years. And the bracelet didn't show enough wear for that kind of journey. The metal tag would have been more corroded. The string holding the beads would have deteriorated more. It's almost like someone carried it there recently, one specialist said, then immediately looked uncomfortable, realizing the implications of that statement. A criminal profiler was brought in to review Lily's case from the beginning. They looked at everyone who'd been at the campground that day. Security footage from the park entrance, credit card transactions, cell phone tower data, anything that might show someone leaving the area who could have taken Lily. One name kept coming up in the analysis. A man named Douglas Webb had checked out of the campground the same day Lily disappeared. He'd been living out of a van, moving from place to place. Park rangers remembered him because he'd asked a lot of questions about the area and seemed nervous. But he'd left before anyone realized Lily was missing, and at the time there was no reason to stop him. The FBI tracked Webb's movements after he left the park. He'd driven south, then his trail went cold near the port of Oakland. That was one of the busiest shipping ports on the West Coast. Thousands of containers left there every week, heading to destinations all over the world. Many went to Asia. If Webb had criminal connections, he could have arranged passage on a cargo ship, Agent Martinez explained during another conference call. People do it to disappear, to avoid debts or legal problems. It's not common, but it happens. Rachel felt sick. The thought that some stranger had taken her daughter, hidden her in a shipping container, carried her across the ocean, it was too horrible to fully process. But if Lily was in a container, Tom said slowly, working through the logic, how would her bracelet end up on that island? Unless, everyone fell silent thinking the same thing, unless something had gone wrong during the journey. Unless the container had somehow ended up in the water, unless Lily had been in that container when it did, the Japanese Coast Guard was already preparing to search Forgotten Island. Satellite imagery showed no obvious signs of recent human presence, but the island was small and rocky. Someone could be hiding there, or there could be remains. Nobody wanted to say that word out loud, but it hung in the air during every conversation. Agent Martinez was honest with Rachel and Tom. We need to prepare you for all possibilities. Best case scenario, we find evidence that helps us track where Lily is now. Worst case, she didn't finish the sentence. When can we go there? Rachel asked. To Japan, to the island. When can we be there? We're arranging that now. There's a flight leaving tomorrow night. The Coast Guard will take you to the island once their team has done an initial search. But Rachel, Tom, I need you to understand that what we find might not be what you're hoping for. Rachel nodded, but she'd already made up her mind. She was going to that island. She needed to see where her daughter's bracelet was found. She needed to know what had happened. That night, Rachel and Tom packed their bags with shaking hands. Their neighbors agreed to watch their house. Rachel's sister would handle calls from the media, who were now following every development in the story. Missing girl's bracelet found thousands of miles away was the headline on every news site. On the plane to Tokyo, Rachel couldn't sleep. She kept looking at the photo of Lily's bracelet on her phone, touching the screen as if she could somehow feel her daughter through it. Tom sat beside her, holding her hand, both of them suspended between hope and fear. Somewhere below them was the vast Pacific Ocean. Somewhere out there was a small, forgotten island that might hold the answers they'd been desperately seeking for 3 months. And somewhere, maybe, just maybe, was their daughter. Still alive, still waiting to be found. The plane flew through the night carrying 2 parents toward the truth, whatever that truth might be. The Japanese Coast Guard vessel cut through the morning fog as it approached Forgotten Island. Rachel stood at the railing, her knuckles white from gripping it so tightly. Tom stood beside her, one arm around her shoulders, both of them staring at the dark shape emerging from the mist. The island looked even more desolate than it had in the satellite photos. Jagged volcanic rocks rose from the water like broken teeth. What little vegetation existed clung desperately to cracks in the stone. No beaches, no trees, nothing inviting about it whatsoever. It was the kind of place that ships would naturally avoid, the kind of place where nothing should be able to survive. Captain Ishida, who'd been coordinating the search, approached them with a translator. The initial team went ashore 2 hours ago, he explained through the translator. They're doing a systematic search of the entire island. It's small, only about 2 square miles, but the terrain is difficult. Have they found anything? Rachel asked, her voice barely audible over the sound of the boat's engine. Captain Ishida hesitated. Yes, but we need to investigate further before we know what it means. Those words made Rachel's heart race. They'd found something. She wanted to jump into the water and swim to shore right then, but Tom's arm tightened around her, keeping her steady. As the boat anchored, Rachel could see figures moving on the rocky shore, Coast Guard officers in their uniforms spreading out across the island. One of them was waving, signaling something to the captain. Through binoculars, Captain Ishida looked toward the shore, then lowered them slowly, his expression unreadable. "We can take you ashore now," he said quietly. The small boat that ferried them to the island rocked violently in the waves. Rachel barely noticed. Her eyes were fixed on the rocks ahead, searching for any sign, any clue about what had happened to her daughter. Agent Martinez had flown in from the U.S. and was already on the island. She was waiting for them as they climbed carefully onto the slippery rocks. "Rachel, Tom," Agent Martinez said, helping Rachel find her footing. "We found something. I need you to prepare yourselves. Is she here?" Rachel's voice cracked. "Is Lily here?" "We don't know yet, but there are signs that someone was here recently. Someone who wasn't supposed to be." Agent Martinez led them carefully across the rocks, warning them where to step. They climbed up a slight incline, moving away from the water. The sound of waves crashing against stone echoed around them. Seabirds cried overhead, circling in the gray sky. Then Rachel saw it. In a small depression between 2 large rock formations, protected from the worst of the wind and weather, was a makeshift shelter. It was crude. Pieces of driftwood leaned against the rocks, covered with what looked like plastic sheeting and fabric. But it was clearly made by human hands. Someone had built this. "We found more," one of the Coast Guard officers said through the translator. He led them around the rocks to show them what else they'd discovered. There were bottles, plastic water bottles that had been cut open at the top and positioned to catch rainwater. Several of them still had water in them. Nearby were some empty food wrappers, the kind that came in emergency rations. And then Rachel saw something that made her knees buckle. A purple shirt with a rainbow on it, torn and faded and dirty but unmistakable. "That's Lily's," she whispered, reaching for it. Agent Martinez caught her hand gently. "I know this is hard, but we can't touch anything yet. We need to process everything as evidence. But Rachel, there's more you need to see." Inside the makeshift shelter, protected from the elements, were more items. A life vest, the kind found on ships. Some blankets that looked like they came from an airplane. Pieces of metal and plastic that might have been from some kind of container. And scattered among everything were small signs of a child. A drawing scratched into a flat piece of driftwood, showing a stick figure and what might have been a house. Some shells arranged in a pattern. A little pile of smooth stones. "Someone survived here," Tom said, his voice shaking. Someone was here and they were trying to stay alive. One of the search team members called out from further up the rocks. Everyone moved quickly toward the sound. Rachel's legs felt like they might give out, but she forced herself to keep moving to see whatever they'd found. It was another sheltered spot, this one with a better view of the ocean. And there, scratched into the rock face with what must have been a sharp stone, were words. Crude letters, some barely legible but clear enough to read. "Lily Henderson, help." Rachel's sob echoed across the rocks. Tom caught her as her legs finally did give out. She sank down onto the stone, staring at her daughter's name carved into the rock. Lily had been here. Her baby had been here, alone, scared, trying to survive. "She's alive," Rachel said through her tears. She was alive. She wrote her name. She was here. Agent Martinez knelt beside them. "Rachel, these supplies, the way everything is arranged, someone was here recently. Very recently. The food wrappers aren't weathered enough to have been here long. Maybe a week, maybe 2. But where is she now?" Tom asked desperately. "If she was here, where did she go?" Captain Ishida had been conferring with his team, speaking rapidly in Japanese. He came over to them, his expression grave. "We found something else. Down by the water's edge, there are drag marks in the sand between the rocks. Recent marks. And there are boot prints. Adult boot prints." Rachel looked up sharply. "What does that mean?" "It means," Agent Martinez said carefully, "that Lily might not have been alone when she left this island. Someone else was here. Someone found her." The implications hit Rachel like a physical blow. Had someone rescued Lily? Or had the person who took her in the first place come back for her? Was her daughter safe right now or in danger? "We need to search the entire island again," Captain Ishida ordered his team. "Look for any other signs, and we need to check with shipping companies, fishing vessels, anyone who might have passed near this island in the last 2 weeks." As the search intensified, Rachel sat among the rocks where her daughter had survived, holding the purple shirt that Agent Martinez had finally allowed her to touch. The fabric still smelled like the ocean, but underneath that, Rachel thought she could detect the faintest hint of the strawberry shampoo Lily used. Her daughter had been here. She'd survived a journey across the Pacific Ocean. She'd made it to this desolate rock and had found a way to stay alive. The thought filled Rachel with a fierce pride mixed with overwhelming fear. Lily was strong. She was a fighter. But where was she now? Tom stood nearby, staring out at the vast ocean surrounding them. "She's out there somewhere," he said quietly. "We were too late getting here, but she's still alive. I can feel it." One of the Coast Guard officers approached with an evidence bag. Inside was a small object they'd found near the shelter. It was a child's drawing, done on the back of what looked like a shipping label using what might have been charcoal from a fire. The drawing showed a boat and a stick figure with a smile. At the bottom, in careful letters, was written, "Going home." Rachel stared at the drawing, fresh tears streaming down her face. Lily believed she was going home. She'd gotten on a boat with someone thinking they would take her home. But who? And where were they now? Agent Martinez was already on the phone with authorities in Tokyo, giving them descriptions, requesting urgent checks on all vessels that had been in this area recently. The search was far from over. In fact, it was just beginning again, but this time with new urgency and new hope. Lily Henderson was alive. She'd survived the impossible. Now they just had to find her before it was too late. The breakthrough came from an unlikely source. A small fishing vessel called the Morning Star had been operating in the waters near Forgotten Island 12 days earlier. The captain, an older man named Takeshi, had seen the news reports about the missing American girl and the bracelet. Something had been bothering him since he'd seen those stories, something he couldn't quite put his finger on. Then he remembered. About 2 weeks ago, he'd seen smoke rising from Forgotten Island. Just a small wisp, barely visible. He'd thought it was strange because nobody lived there, but he'd been focused on his catch and hadn't investigated. Now, watching the news, he wondered if that smoke had been a signal fire. Takeshi contacted the Coast Guard immediately. Within hours, Agent Martinez was interviewing him through a translator, and Rachel and Tom were sitting beside her, holding hands so tightly their fingers had gone numb. "I didn't go to the island," Takeshi explained, looking guilty. "I should have, if I'd known a child was there. But I did see another boat in the area that same day. A small cargo vessel, maybe 40 feet long. I remembered it because it was anchored unusually close to the island, which didn't make sense. There's nothing there worth stopping for." "Did you see the name of the boat?" Agent Martinez asked urgently. Takeshi shook his head. "It was too far away. But I can tell you what direction it was heading when it left. Northeast toward the main shipping lanes." The Coast Guard pulled up vessel tracking data for the entire region. It was like looking for a needle in a haystack. Hundreds of boats passed through those waters every day. But they had a time frame now and a direction. They started filtering through maritime records, looking for any vessel that matched Takeshi's description. Meanwhile, the FBI was closing in on Douglas Webb from another direction. They'd tracked him to Singapore, where he'd disembarked from a cargo ship 3 days after Lily disappeared. What Webb didn't know was that his movements had been caught on port security cameras. He'd been alone, looking nervous, carrying a small duffel bag. But here's where the story got complicated. The cargo ship Webb had been on had lost several containers during a storm in the Pacific. The shipping company had filed reports about it, standard procedure when containers go overboard. The location where they'd lost those containers was only about 60 miles from Forgotten Island. Agent Martinez laid it all out for Rachel and Tom in a hotel room in Tokyo. "We think Webb took Lily and hid her in a shipping container. He was running from debts from some dangerous people, and he'd arranged illegal passage on that cargo ship. But during the storm, the container Lily was in went overboard." Rachel's hand flew to her mouth. The thought of her 8-year-old daughter trapped in a metal container, falling into the ocean during a storm, it was every parent's worst nightmare. But somehow, Agent Martinez continued, the container stayed afloat long enough to drift with the currents. It eventually broke apart near Forgotten Island, and Lily managed to get to shore. She found a life vest in the debris, some supplies, and she survived. "Your daughter is incredibly resourceful, Rachel. But who took her from the island?" Tom asked. "The boot prints, the drag marks, someone else was there." That's where the story took an unexpected turn. The Coast Guard had found the boat Takeshi had seen. It belonged to a man named Hiro Matsuda, a former rescue worker who now lived alone on his small vessel, fishing and doing odd jobs along the coast. When authorities tracked him down at a marina near Osaka, they found him with a small girl who matched Lily's description. The girl was weak, dehydrated, and couldn't speak much Japanese. But she could say one word very clearly: "Mama." The phone call came at 3 a.m. Rachel and Tom were awake anyway, unable to sleep, unable to do anything but wait. When Agent Martinez said, "We found her. We found Lily, and she's alive," Rachel screamed so loudly that hotel security came running. The reunion happened in a hospital in Osaka. Lily was in a bed, connected to IV fluids, her skin sunburned and covered in scratches, her hair tangled and much shorter than it had been. She'd lost weight, and her eyes had a haunted look that broke Rachel's heart. But when she saw her parents rushing through the door, those eyes lit up. "Mommy." "Daddy." Rachel couldn't speak. She just held her daughter, sobbing, while Tom wrapped his arms around both of them. Doctors and nurses stood by, many of them crying too. It was the kind of moment that reminded everyone why they did the work they did. Through broken sentences and with the help of a child psychologist, Lily's story came out over the following days. She told them about the man at the campground who'd seemed nice at first, who'd told her he'd found a lost puppy and asked her to help look for it. She talked about being scared in the dark container, about the storm and the terrible sound of metal tearing apart. She described swimming to the island with a life vest, finding pieces of what she later learned was an old airplane crash, and figuring out how to collect rainwater. I remembered the show Daddy and I watched, Lily said quietly, looking at Tom. About people surviving on islands. I remembered to find shelter and collect water. And I knew someone would come look for me. I knew you wouldn't stop looking. Hiro Matsuda's story was equally moving. He'd been sailing near the island when he'd seen smoke. Lily had been burning dried seaweed to create a signal. He'd gone to investigate and found a terrified little girl who'd been alone for almost 2 weeks. He'd wanted to radio for help immediately, but his radio had been broken for days, and he was heading to port to get it fixed anyway. I tried to tell her she was safe, Hiro explained through a translator, tears in his eyes. I gave her food and water. I was taking her to the authorities as fast as I could. I never meant to scare anyone. I just wanted to help her get home. Hiro wasn't charged with anything. In fact, Rachel and Tom insisted on thanking him personally. Without his decision to investigate that smoke signal, Lily might have been on that island for much longer, growing weaker each day. Douglas Webb was extradited to the United States, where he faced charges of kidnapping and child endangerment. The evidence against him was overwhelming. Security footage, witness statements, his own panicked behavior when caught. He would spend the next several decades in prison. But for the Henderson family, the legal proceedings were secondary. What mattered was that they had their daughter back. The doctor said Lily would need time to recover, both physically and emotionally. She had nightmares about the ocean and the container. She was afraid of the dark. She didn't like being alone in a room, but she was also stronger than anyone expected. She talked about her survival with a matter-of-fact tone that amazed the psychologists. I knew I had to be brave, she told them. I knew Mommy and Daddy were looking for me. I just had to stay alive until they found me. The bracelet that had started it all, that had traveled across an ocean and led to Lily's rescue, was returned to the family. Rachel had it professionally preserved, exactly as Kenji had found it, salt stains and all. It sat in a small display case in their living room, a reminder of the miracle that had brought their daughter home. Kenji Yamamoto came to visit them once Lily was well enough to travel back to California. He brought his granddaughter with him, and the two girls played together despite not speaking the same language. Before he left, Kenji told Rachel and Tom through a translator, "The ocean gives and the ocean takes. This time it gave back. Your daughter is a miracle." Lily started 3rd grade that fall, a little behind her classmates but catching up quickly. She had to answer a lot of questions from curious kids about her adventure, and her teachers kept a close eye on her, watching for signs of trauma. But mostly Lily just wanted to be a normal 8-year-old again. She never wanted to go camping, though. And she wouldn't wear her bracelet anymore. It held too many memories. But she kept it close on her nightstand, where she could see it every morning when she woke up safe in her own bed. Rachel and Tom threw away the tent they'd been setting up that terrible day. They sold their camping gear. Some experiences leave scars too deep to revisit, but they didn't let fear rule their lives. They took Lily to the beach, to the mountains, to new places. They just stayed closer together now. They held hands more. They said, "I love you" every single day, because they knew better than most people ever would how quickly everything can change, how a moment of inattention can lead to months of agony. But they also knew about resilience, about hope, about the incredible strength hidden inside a small girl who refused to give up. And sometimes, late at night, Rachel would stand in Lily's doorway and watch her daughter sleep, safe and sound, and whisper a thank you to a fisherman named Kenji who'd noticed.